Hello and welcome to another YouTube BuildASoil episode. Today we've got Season 6, Episode 3. Today's gonna be a longer episode. It's gonna be a fundamentals class. Not only am I gonna start here, I've got the tent closed because the humidity's trapped in there. I wanna open it and show you what it looks like with no environmental control. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna head into a back office here where I've got a whiteboard set up, and I'm gonna do like a whiteboard instructional on the formulas for your lighting and your environment, and we'll do a real brief talk on electrical if you're new. When you're brand new, you wanna hook up a grow light. Let's make sure that the amount of lights and equipment we're gonna plug in is safe on the breaker we're gonna use in our bedroom or garage. Make sure that we know that. So at my house, I have 20 amp breakers. I'll discuss that in the whiteboard with you, how to make use of that. On top of that, the next thing we want to discuss is the intensity of the light over the entire time the light's on. It could be on 12 hours, it could be on 24 hours. That's going to give you a different reading for what they call DLI, or the daily lighting integral. We're also going to talk about PPF, PPFD, all the basics, which sound complicated, but I promise when we go over the video, although it's a lot, I think when you're done, even if you don't remember all the facts, you'll better understand how the environment kind of goes together like a clock and all the gears have to interplay. And a lot of times when customers call, they'll say, I water this often, my light's this bright, my temperatures are here. Everything should be good, but why my plant's not good? And we remind them, maybe that watering isn't keeping up with the high intensity, with the low humidity, and some of the things that make the environment all work. It's not just one reading, it's all of it. If you can't control all of it, focus on the weakest link and gradually improve, and I think you're gonna see an improvement in the health of your plants and the finished product. So let's go into the office right now. I'm gonna take a peek through, I'll give you the reading, and then I'll show you when we get back. Right now, I'm at 81.3 degrees and 72% humidity, but I've got my light dimmed just a little bit, and if I crank it, it gets too hot, and then I'd have to exhaust air, which will lower the humidity. So instead of me doing all that off camera, I felt like we'd do it today, and I'll show you how I tinker. But before, I want you to understand why. So follow me, and then we'll come back out here and we'll discuss that, all right? Okay, so thanks for watching along so far. And what I really wanna do is show you how to set up the environment and the lighting in your grow environment. Whether that's a tent, a room, it does not matter. What I'd like to teach you is the fundamental principles so that you're independent and you can set this up in any space as opposed to dependent upon some recipe without knowing the why. And so I've got a whiteboard set up. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of glare. We don't have the best lighting in here. I've got a VPD chart, which I'm more gonna reference from afar as far as the principle. I'm not gonna have you read these exact numbers. And then I do have some charts that I'll hold up to the screen, and those are available at BuildASoil and also with a common Google. You can get like a basic search, you can find most of these charts. But until you understand the principles, the chart may not mean much. So we'll go over all of that. And today we're gonna cover lighting and we're gonna cover environment. And really that's the grow environment, is the light, the humidity, the temperature, all of those different things. But when it comes to the lighting, we're gonna be discussing PPF, PPFD, and DLI. And if you followed some of the growing practices for a while, if this is not your first deal, then you probably know what those mean, or at least you've heard of them, and you might have a basic understanding. I'd like to dive just a little bit deeper so that we get that fundamental base knowledge and we can apply this to our own grow. And then when it comes to environment, we're gonna be discussing temps, humidity, and VPD, as well as leaf versus room, and how to set that up. And all of these will go together. So it's important. And then what we're gonna do is once we lay down all of the basics in here so that you understand the whys, we're gonna go back out to the 4x4 tent, and then we're going to actually set the environment up or discuss how we'll set it up so that you can see how I'm running this entire Season 6. We're gonna do the same thing in the 10x10 as far as how we set things up. At least we're gonna follow these principles. And in the 4x4, it mirrors a lot more like what you might be growing in. So we'll show you that today, since we've got the 2 autoflowers that are already growing and they're seedlings, and the environment's right in there, but it needs to be dialed before the plants start to grow too quick, or I could have some issues, and we'll discuss that. Right now it's winter, so it's really easy to control these, at least in my opinion. And so you've got to focus on the weakest link in your own grow. If you're somewhere where it's super hot, the weakest link might be temperature. If you're somewhere where it's really dry, the weakest link might be humidity. And either way, you're gonna have to, if you can't do the whole environment at once, you're gonna have to just control what you can control and learn from these principles to make it so that you're at least within some normal range for a healthy grow. And then as your budget and time allows, you can slowly improve your environment to get even better results. So let's jump right in. And I think what I'd like to do is tackle the discussion of lighting first, and then we will jump in and discuss the grow environment. Because really, once you get your light determined, that's kind of the main generator of energy that's going to create the rest of your environment. And what I mean by that is, if you have a little seedling tent and your light has barely any heat and you don't need very much light, then it's not going to create an environment that's hard to keep up with humidity and temperature. But if you've got a big light in a small space and you crank it up full blast, you can overdo it really, really easily without having the rest of the grow environment figured out. So let's talk about lighting. I've got a small whiteboard, so I'm just gonna erase. All right, and we'll leave it up here for PPF, PPFD, and DLI, and we'll discuss that right now. And so essentially, you're gonna hear this term PAR. And that is photosynthetic active radiation. And this is photosynthetic photon flux. And so this is measured in how much light is being put off from the light. And this one's how much the plants are receiving. So I'll tell you about it in a drawing. I think it'll really help. But PAR is what you usually hear. And most people, even when I say it, PAR means this one, PPFD. And the main reason is that's what we're setting up to our grow environment. But that's across a certain area, which is 1 meter squared, where this is just what's coming off the light. Most people are reading PPF. Caveat, I'm not like a scientist or a light expert. This is just how I use this information in my grow, so I think it'll really help you. So if we picture a grow light, let's say we've got some LED grow light. Let's say it's a high grove, like I've been using, okay? And you've got all of these different photons, these light particles that are coming out of the light as they're created, and they're coming off the light like this, okay? And so if you were to measure those, they measure this reading, PPFD, PPF. We're talking about PPF right now, okay, because that's what's coming off of the light. And they measure this in a fraction of a mole. And a mole is a measurement of that energy. And so they use what you're going to see called a U mole. And that is a 1/1,000,000th of a mole. So it is a fraction of it. And so if you have 1,000,000 micromoles, which is a U mole, you have 1 mole. So 1 mil, right? 1 m micromole equals a mole. And the only reason you need to know that is it kind of helps understand why you can be looking at 1,000 PPFD, but when it comes over to DLI, we're looking at moles, because it's this right here, this is in 1 second. That's what's so important about this measurement. This is a measurement over 1 second. And so what I really want to drive home today is that DLI is about your whole day. That's what's important, is not just 1 second of the light, but how many seconds in a minute, how many minutes in an hour, and how long are you running your lights. That is how you tell how much light the plant got for an entire day. And that's important because when you're reading this PPF number and you convert over to DLI, most of us are growing 18 to 24 hours in veg and 12 hours in flower. Okay? And so the same PPF or PPFD for 24 hours is twice as much light that the plant is getting as if you only did it for 12 hours. So the DLI is that conversion, which is important because a lot of new growers, they get this LED light, they crank it up to 100%, and they may have their lights on 24 hours, and their plants decline in health. And they're like, man, I just got this new grow light, everything should be great. We'll discuss how important it is later for a full grow, but certainly when they're seedlings, realistically what has to happen is the soil has to keep up with the light. It has to produce nutrients. that the plant can use. And so if you get a brand new grow light and you've got little seedlings and you drop it right on there and you crank it and the environment's not right, it's like making children run a marathon at a full sprint. Might look good for the first few minutes, but pretty soon it's going to decline. And so the idea is to let them just walk. And that's why when we know the target DLI, we can configure what percentage our light should be based on how many hours we're running. So let me continue. We have this grow light, okay? And I know this is a small board, but I'm hoping that you can follow along here. And so now we have 1 meter squared, right? We have this space and it's 1 meter by 1 meter, right? And you could go on a grid and you could measure how many photons are hitting all over this different area as the light's going, okay? And then when you add up how many photons hit this 1 meter area, now we're talking PPFD, and that's photosynthetic photon flux density. The density is how many of them, not just how much the light puts off, but how many of them hit in this area. And why that's important is if you go to a light manufacturer, and some of these lights were popular for a while. I know they have spread on the lens, there's all these different things, but you literally get like one LED like this, right? Huge cannon on it. And they would put their par meter right here, and they would say PPF equals 2000 or something just insane. They're like, most powerful grow light in the world. But then where your plants are is here, right? And maybe they're getting like 100 over here, 200 here, 1,000 here because it's going straight down. And so when you realize that PPF is just a measurement right under the light, you realize the more important is, yeah, but how much of that's gonna spread across my canopy? And then if you know that's a meter by a meter, it's even more confusing because most of us aren't growing in a 3x3 area. It's 4x4 or 5x5, right? And so that's what we're looking with, not a meter. And that's why most of us just get the PPF reading from the light at all corners around there, okay? And so I've got the formula written down. Some of this stuff is just harder for me to remember off the top, and I don't want to do it incorrectly. Now I think you understand that this is PPF and this is PPFD, okay? Now I'm going to go over what we're looking for as far as numbers, and I will discuss that. In fact, if you just want to get that information right now, you can go to BuildASoil.com. At the top, there's an educational tab, and you can look up the complete system. We have this printout, and on here, you're going to see the most important part is not the feeding chart. The feeding chart is more just keeping up with the momentum of the plants in the right environment. And I'll explain that a little bit. But the soil has to be able to produce the nutrients. And if it can't, because either your lights are too bright, the container's too small, we missed a watering, whatever it is, then these feedings become more important because they keep the pressure off of that biology and allow your plant to get nutrients as fast as you would like them. But the easier way is to run less light and just allow them to breathe and relax and go all the way through, and you get really good quality that way, and it's easier. So those numbers are on here. You can see the PPFD or par for the light intensity, and it has all the way through the cycles of the plant, and the daily lighting integrals numbers are on here as well. So go ahead and check that out. You can download it. All right. Now let me write down this formula. In fact, I think I'm gonna erase this so we can just get to the formula. If you've got questions about this stuff, we'll do an FAQ on this episode to make sure that we do a good job answering all this stuff. DLI equals PPFD, which now you understand, times light on hours. And that is times 3,600 divided by 1 million. That seems kind of complicated, but the reason that I wanted to show you the formula is to give you that little deeper dive. At the end of the day, all you need to know is that how bright your light is over how many hours gives you the number that we're looking for. So for instance, PPFD, this is in micromoles, okay? And so when I'm in flower, I like to be around 900 PPFD. Some people go up to like 1,400, okay? CO2, certain strains that can really take it, lots of soil, really good balance on the nutrients, and you can kind of crank it. But I see better quality sometimes even in this 600 to 900 range on PPFD. But the DLI numbers that we recommend on our chart, they're not in micromoles. They're in moles because it's over an entire day. And now you can see that. Here's the micromole, the 1/1,000,000th. And it's divided by 3,600 because we're talking seconds. And so if I do some math real quick, let me grab my calculator. 3,600 divided by 60, okay, is 60. So that gives you the seconds in an hour. So now we're taking the hour, how many hours, dividing it by 1,000,000, so now we get it into moles as opposed to the micromoles. And that's how we're gonna get our rating because DLI is measured that way. And so I'll give you some numbers on here real quick. DLI, when it comes to seedlings or rooted cuts, we're in the 15 to 20 range. And then when we're in veg, all right, on our chart here, it's 30 to 40. And really for flower, it's about the same too. And so in flower, I have 40 to 60 at the bloom transition during stretch, which is really, it's pushing it a little bit. I really think less is more. We might update this chart a little bit. So that is stretch, which is right when you flip to flower. And then for ripening and the rest of it, we like to be in that 35 to 55 range. And these are kind of made up, meaning this is just a conversion of light intensity over a number of hours that we've seen work. I really do feel like less is more when it comes to light, and I want to drive that home. In fact, today I was talking on Instagram to a Wolf out of Canada. Some of you guys know who he is. He says whatever he wants. He's got a great personality. He's always commented on BuildASoil posts. We've talked a few times over the years, and he's just always so nice, and he's a great grower. And he's like, you know what? So many new growers, they just too much light, and the plants can't take it. And less is more, and I really agree with him, and we were discussing it, so I wanted to honor that and make sure I mentioned that today. So thank you. I've always appreciated your friendship. And then when it comes to the actual formula here, the reason why I wrote this down is you can see 15 to 20, when I'm talking 900, like how does that work? Well, you get the formula. And so now we can take the formula and we take our PPFD. So let's say I'm targeting that 900, and we're gonna go for 12 hours. Okay, so that gives me 10,800. Now I need to multiply that times this formula. So let's just do the beginning since I'm on the calculator here. 3,600 divided by 1,000,000 equals 0.0036, which makes sense. So now that we have that, that's a multiplication. So 10,000, so times 10,800. And that equals 38.88. Now you can see where the DLI falls into, which this is gonna work for veg. It's gonna be close to working for stretch, and that's part of why I wanna change this number. I guess what I like to see is a lot of times during stretch, they can handle that 1,000 under most grows pretty easily. So that's part of why I put that during the stretch phase. But the other thing that you gotta consider is they're doubling in size. So if your light's up on the ceiling, and you're in this 900 range in veg, when you flip to flower, it's gonna start to grow into the 1,000 or higher range unless you dim your light. And so obviously you can drop your light down and dim it and be the most energy efficient. But I think with today's lights and the experience we wanna create, it's pretty easy to put the light on the ceiling and dim it a little bit until you hit the range that you're after. But the whole reason I wanted to do this formula is so that you can understand 600, 900, whatever your PPFD is. And if you don't have a meter, you can go to your light manufacturer and you can read, okay, at 100%, what is my PPFD at a certain distance? Okay, so at 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot. And if you get the distance and you say, my light at 100% at 3 feet away should be 1,000 par, whatever the number is. Well, then you know, okay, that's as close as I ever want to get. No more than 3 feet closer, or it's going to be too high based on my formula. And then you can plug your own numbers into this formula and run it. Otherwise, it's really easy to just find a DLI calculator, tell it the number of hours you're running your light and how powerful your light is, and it'll just do that math really quickly for you. But I think now we've driven it all home. Before I really understood the term DLI, I noticed that plants could take way more light in flower, And I thought maybe it was just because the plants are like flowering, but really it's because it's on 12 hours. And when we got the double-endeds and when we started to get LEDs, the power became so much more potent that you could overdrive the plants a lot easier. Like when I was running 315s, a lot harder to overdrive it. 315s are one of my favorite grow lights, but the LED are so safe and so easy to use that when you understand this, I think you can use your new technology a little bit better. It's so easy to overdo it. And we haven't even gotten to the environment. So I'd like to get to environment and jump in. There's one last thing I want to go over with grow lights that I think is important for the home grower. So let me discuss that, and that's your electrical. I'm not an electrician. Don't take this as professional advice, but I'm going to tell you some of the things to look out for. I do not want you to have a fire or a problem because you're trying to grow. Okay, and you can watch much better videos on this, but I want to bring this into sort of a class so that you understand at least what to look out for, okay? Now, when I started, I didn't know much about electricity, scared me a lot. Now I'm a lot more handy, you know? Growing teaches you so much, it's awesome. But when it comes to power, typically in the United States, obviously you can grow anywhere. So just, you know, take this with a grain of salt. But most of the time what we hear about is this 120 or 240. And typically what that means in the United States is the regular plug, okay, that you use, that is a 120, and then they have this weird one with like the bent like this. There's so many plug shapes, okay? That's the 240. This is commercial, like your home dryer. At home, when I first started, let's say you have 2 grow lights, right? And they were the old school type. So you had like glass hoods and all this stuff, and we're talking 1,000 waters. And you're like, man, how many amps does that use? And you'd look and it'd be like 12 amps or something. Okay, and so you get that reading and you say, okay, perfect. Well, how does that work? And you say, I have a 20 amp breaker and I'm on 120, 20 amps. And you're thinking, okay, perfect. I can run that light. But if I do 2 of them, that's too much for the breaker in my house. So what you can do is have an electrician switch it to 240. Now your electrical bill is gonna be the same. You're still running 2 1,000 watt lights. That doesn't change. And what was so confusing is my friends, I remember when I first started, they were like, bro, when you switch to 240, your electrical bill will go in half. So I was ready to spend money on the electrician. What I didn't realize is I could just fit double the lights on the same breaker. So now that 20 amp light on 240, where it may have been 12 amps to run a light, now it's 6 amps to run that same light. And so now I can fit 2. So I can fit 2 grow lights now because I went to 240 on the same breaker. And so that's just something to be aware of, but it doesn't cut your electrical bill in half or anything. The other thing that I want you to know about, okay, is if you get a power strip, or we have the NIWA or a timer, okay, most are gonna be rated to 15 amps. And a lot of breakers in your house might be 15 amps. Most of us are gonna have 20 amps. Okay, and so my rule of thumb, I'm sure electrician can tell you better, is if I have this 20 amp breaker, I don't wanna go above 15. You're running a grow and it's all the time on. We're not talking like when your coffee machine, or like let's say your toaster starts up, or your toaster oven, or a blender, or something that may use a little more power in your kitchen. It's like for a few seconds, or for when it ramps up and on, and then after that it maintains a lower amperage. Well, if we plug everything into our grow and it's on 24 hours a day, or 18 hours a day, or 12 hours a day, that's a lot of load on that breaker all the time, causing heat, and it could cause a fire eventually. And so most of the products that we get have a 15 amp limit because that trips the breaker or the fuse within the actual power strip. Like the NIWA is rated for 15 amps. When I ran more than 15, it actually fused the plastic in there. And they've since upgraded the device so that it will trigger it off instead of fuse like that. But the goal is to look at your grow light. Most of these LEDs run pretty low amperage, but on a 15 amp breaker, the most you wanna run, let's say it's 7.5 amps for your grow light when it's on 100%. 2 grow lights is all you can put on that one breaker. So if that's in your house, a lot of times you can find your breaker panel and you can find like the outlets and flip off and then try the electrical outlets. And it might be that in your bedroom, one wall is one 20 amp breaker and maybe the other wall is another 20 amp breaker. Now you can split your grow lights, 2 of them into that side, and all your other equipment into the other side, and then you'll never go above 15 amps because you've already done your calculations. And the good news is that's at 100%. A lot of times on an LED, you can lower the power below 100%, and you'll be well in that safe range. So if any of that was confusing, probably because I'm not the best at explaining it, but I at least wanted to mention it so that if you are at home and you're considering getting 3 grow lights and plugging them in, you might want to slow down a little bit and think, okay, how many amps are the light? How many amps are my breaker? How does that fit together? And under that scenario where the bedroom has 2 different breakers, what I used to do is I would run an extension cord from another bedroom if it didn't work. Now, the longer the extension cord, the less safety it is. So it may be that you convert to 240, and that allows you to run more off that same breaker. And that's another way to go. The last consideration is, your humidifier, your fans, all those ancillaries, you can look up the amps on all of those. That way, if you truly only have one 20 amp breaker, you can at least say, okay, I'm gonna get 1 grow light, and then I'll calculate how many amps the rest of my equipment is, and I'll add it up. So make sure you do that step, it's important, and that'll make sure your grow is safe. Just because they're LED doesn't mean that the electrical can't cause a problem. It used to be worried about the bulb exploding or catching on fire, but you can still throw a lot of power on an old breaker in an old house. God forbid you have like copper wiring with pigtails or something strange. Sorry, aluminum. It could be even worse, right? We wanna be safe. Growing's not worth a life like that. So that's the lighting side. I really hope that helped. I'd like to jump in environment. And of course, we've done lots of episodes on this. It may be that it takes you 2 or 3 times hearing it to get it. Again, if you have questions on this stuff, please post it up in here. You can also at BuildASoil under education, you can check out our complete course. I do more whiteboard videos like this. They're years old, they're not the best edited, but I still think it drives some principles home, and our goal will be to constantly update those videos with ones like this. So let's do the next part, and that is the environment. So we want to talk about temp, humidity, and ultimately VPD, because once you unlock this, it changes everything. In veg, it'll double your veg speed, and we don't want to veg for very long, and that's important. We always want to be flowering. In flower, it'll help you understand how to keep everything in relationship to the speed that you're going so that it continues to produce healthy plants. What I mean is, if your nutrients and your lighting are set up to go, if your nutrients and your soil are set up to go slow, but your light is set up to go fast, it's gonna be out of sync, and it's gonna cause confusion because you could still have really good data that says you have a good environment, but you may not be keeping up with it. And so let's get into that, okay? In a common grow, we're gonna have the light, which we talked about, and we're gonna have a certain DLI, and that's how much light is coming off and hitting this over how many hours, okay? And that's important because if you set up your brand new grow, a lot of times, a lot of our customers, and this is how I did it, I bought one part at a time. So I bought my light, and I literally hung it up off the ceiling. Then I bought a tent, then I put it in there. Then I bought a timer, then I put the timer in. So in the beginning, when I popped seeds, I was on 24 hours of light because I heard that was okay. Eventually I got it to 18 hours, and personally, I think that like 18 hours or 20 hours, a lot better than 24. There's science that shows that during the downtime, even though cannabis is the type of plant that can take light 24 hours, something about the biology in the soil, the root exudates, the downtime, I think there's an interplay there, and I think plants like it. So I like to be on 18 hours for veg. I'm not gonna talk about how to grow, okay? I'm just gonna talk about the environment right now. But for the number of hours, that'll be the DLI, okay? And then we have, let's say we could do it like this and say a 5 gallon versus someone who is like in a 4x4 bed. Whatever, my drawing's freaking horrible. These are different as far as the nutrient flow. And so over here, what we've highlighted is that if this is really bright, not only are you gonna have to water multiple times a day because you're gonna have water going through this faster, but the nutrients, it's biologically driven in soil. And so if you're not feeding at all and you're having moisture swings, which could slow down the biological release of nutrients, and with those moisture swings, possible temperature swings, because it's not such a big battery, that could be affecting some things. And so what I would recommend if you're in smaller containers is let's lower this DLI a lot less than you think, and let's just make it really easy on ourselves. That's part of how I crushed out that 5-gallon in season 5, was because it was out of the light just a little bit. So it made me look good. But it's also because I was playing within the rules of how that would work, because I know how to bend them now that I know the rules. So if you want to be in that like 40 plus DLI, you better have good soil volume, automated watering, sub-irrigated watering, some way where it's always in that right zone. Some people might even add CO2, but that's how you get a healthy plant in a high DLI where you're really driving it fast. And so I would recommend most people to keep their par in that 600 to 900 range, even in flower. That will lower the DLI down, and that will make it so that any of these setups work a lot better. And so in the beginning, a lot of us would brew compost teas all the time. And I think what that would do is that would help create nutrient cycling that was faster, and it would make soluble nutrients that were available to the plant. The idea with all the living soil systems, when we're talking water only, is to keep this in a medium range where you're not putting too much pressure, and have a good battery of soil down here with lots of horsepower in it so that it can keep up on its own. That's a water only grow. If you get to the point where your light's going too fast, or for instance, the canopy, even out of this big bed of soil, was way more biomass than you anticipated producing, to keep up with it so you don't fall off, this biology needs to be able to keep up. And so what we do in living soil is we take pressure off of the soil through many ways. Almost like an athlete, if they're working out twice a day for an extreme sport, or they're running a marathon or something like that, they're gonna be maybe drinking protein shakes, all sorts of different stuff. So when it comes to that, our answer holistically, naturally in a living soil system is to use compost teas, is to use enzymes that lower the energy required for a reaction to occur. Fulvics, humics, catalysts, things like this that allow that energy to be lower and still get the same result. That's how we keep up. That's how we produce weight, all of those things, quality. On top of that, we have biological products, and those will help release nutrients and keep them in flow. So you can see how the hacks, fulvic acid and sugars and compost teas and amino acids, although we're not really directly feeding the plant, we're keeping the pressure off the soil, which keeps your high intensity light from overdriving it. Or maybe your light's in the right range, but you just grew a way bigger plant than you anticipated for the container size. That's why our feeding chart has some where you can feed and some where maybe you don't. Like our last cycle in the 4x4 bed was water only, and it crushed it because it had plenty of nutrient cycling. The worms are going hard in there. The mulch layer is breaking down. It's on its 3rd, 4th cycle. So that's where this all comes together. Okay, now VPD, besides the DLI, all the stuff we're talking about with lighting, VPD is a measure of the temperature and the humidity combined, okay? And this chart over here shows you an ideal range. And now I know you can't see the numbers, but just imagine that this green area is where you want to hit, and there's some numbers on there. And what we have on the left is temp, and what we have on the right side is the relative humidity. So let's do that. Temp. In fact, I'm gonna erase this and we'll talk VPD real quick. So let's do it. 100% humidity right here, all the way to 0% humidity right here. 50 to 113 is what they have on theirs. So that's their temperature range, okay? And then their sweet spot is like right in here, okay? And so what that means is that when we're, let's say in the middle, 50% humidity, that's gonna correlate in the sweet spot to a certain temperature. And so that looks like it's in the middle. Let's say that's 75 degrees or something like that, right? So what we're looking for is at a certain temperature, we have a certain humidity, and that fits within this range. This range is where there's the least amount of pressure on the plant based on the temperature and humidity. And so if you think of it like this, the plant has its roots in the soil and its leaves are receiving the light. And to do so, it's got to open up all these little pores, the stomata, and it's got to be able to receive and transpire and move the moisture. And the more light that's coming and the less humidity in the air, the more it has to sweat, so to speak. The more it has to pull moisture from the soil and bring it up to the leaves, or it can't take the light. And so think about like if you're running and you have no moisture in you and it's really hot out and it's dry, you're gonna need to drink a lot more water. But if it's super humid and you're not going quite as hard, you can be a little bit more mellow. And when it comes to the VPD temperature, it's similar. So when we're in a lower temp, we don't need as much humidity. So this might be 30% humidity, and it's okay when we're in a really low temp. All right, and We might need a lot higher when we're like, let's say 90 degrees, okay? That might be like 80% humidity. Now these are made up numbers. I would prefer that you use a VPD chart and do exact calculations based on that. And you can find this exact chart. This one is made by Pulse USA. They make a monitoring equipment that we used to carry. And you can just print them out. So this is a veg one, this is a flower one. And so on our BuildASoil chart, which we mentioned, you can actually look up the target VPD for each stage of growth, and it'll indicate where we like to keep it and what we've seen works really well. And so now that you know this, a lot of growers, they'll come in and they'll be like, hey, my tent is 80 degrees. It's perfect. My brand new grow light is 1,000 PPFD. And instead of putting it up high, I've got it on 100% and I've got it right on the plant. In fact, that 1,000 PPFD was a measurement at 1 foot, but I'm 6 inches. So maybe we're at 1,500 now or something crazy. And they're at 80 degrees and they say, my temperature's fine. And then you ask them, well, what's your humidity? And they're like, oh, it's 40%. It's totally fine. Like plants can grow in that. And you go, I know, I get it. But when you look at what's happening, you're a little warm. Okay, so let me go find it exactly on here. Okay, so 81 degrees. We need to be in the target range here, and this is probably for flower, I'm not positive. This is targeting a 1.2 to a 1.3 VPD number, which is around 65% humidity. So they are missing this by 25%, and they're overdriving it to the point where the plant can barely keep up unless they're feeding highly soluble nutrients. And so unless their soil's really dialed and they're super good at what they're doing, this formula will eventually lead some decline in plant health. Where that same grower, let's say this is veg, and they took our advice today and they said, you know what, I'm gonna dim my light to say 75%. And maybe that's gonna be like 600 par or PPFD, let's say, okay? And they worked on getting their humidity up a little bit. So it's the same 80 degrees, but now they're in that 65% humidity range. Now they've got less pressure on the plant to pull that moisture up constantly because it's being dried out by the lack of humidity in the air, which lowers the pressure on the plant, which lowers the pressure on the soil to keep up with nutrients and all of that water flow. And you're not driving it so fast. Now you'll have an extremely healthy plant. And all we have to do is bump the humidity a tiny bit, lower the light pressure just a little bit. But the original grower with the brand new badass grow light, putting it really close, had all the best intentions to give light to their plant. And I know how it is. You're like, well, in nature, the full sun hits them right when they're seedlings, right? And so you want to crank it. But that's how you can have some declined health and some problems. So now that we know that, how does that affect the tent? Let me talk to you about it real quick. Then what I want to do is I just want to go to the grow tent and show you, but I want to do a little bit of illustration here first. So now that you know about the PPFD and all that, one of the things that you'll see is these companies that don't really know how to grow, they'll sell all these grow tent packages. And so they'll sell you a grow tent, let's say it's a 4x4 grow tent. And what you'll see is they'll have this filter, charcoal filter, they'll have this tube, and they'll have the fan, all of it going out the tent, okay? And then they'll have their grow light. Then they'll have their plants. Whatever, so the plants are down here. The problem is you only have this much space now, okay? And if this is at 100% and you've already removed that part, well, you're gonna have to dim from day one. Your light might be too powerful for that tent setup from day one. Maybe in full flower, if you're able to keep the canopy height really low by scrogging, can you make that work? And so the main reason, in my opinion, is odor. So they want to scrub all the air inside the tent through the charcoal filter, and they want the fan here pulling through the charcoal filter and pushing the air out, okay? That way it sucks the tent in, you get some negative pressure. All the air that leaves this tent has to go through a charcoal filter before it goes out, and there's no odor. I just don't care about the odor, and it frees me up a lot. And a lot of people are in legal states, so they may not care. However, you can still put the charcoal filter on the outside. Totally up to you. You can leave it on the inside, just know that eliminates some space for you, okay? And so what I typically do is I like to put the light all the way to the ceiling. Now you can use rope ratchets. You can also put them connected directly to the top pole, all the way to the top. Then what I do is I take my fan, I set it up here, and I pull the air out, and it just blows out into my house. If I wanted to, we could pull the air, okay, through a charcoal filter, or you could push it in through a charcoal filter and out. Either way, I think if you're consistently using it the same way, whether you're pulling it through that charcoal filter or pushing it out through, the air goes through it, you're gonna get the intended result. But I'm not concerned with odor. So if you're really concerned, in a legal state, whatever it is, research those best practices. The last thing I wanna do is tell you something that works for me, but the odor, if it's super important, it may have to get taken through as far as that way. And other people will, you can put the filter like over here and have it going out. So you can still find a way to manage the space. But I'm just gonna say, a lot of those images you see of the grow tents, I don't set it up that way because I like to maximize the space and I don't care about the odor. And then here's the other part. Now that we're discussing this fan, I'll discuss it on the tent. If you have this little space here and you're trying to keep a VPD and you're like me, and the space out here is, let's say, 20% humidity. And in here, you want it to be 75%. The problem is as soon as you take the air out, this 20% air is gonna go back in. Now you can have it being pumped in through an intake fan. Oftentimes I'll run my intake fan like this, and it'll just be going into the tent down low and exhaust up high where the heat rises, okay? But when you're taking 20% air in and expecting it to stay at 75%, as soon as you start exchanging this air, it's gonna lower the humidity. And the main reason why we have to exchange this air is for two reasons. One is CO2, and the other one is temps. And so, if you're in a warmer environment and you have your light cranked up to 100%, your tent might be 100 degrees. So you're gonna have to use your exhaust fan to bring cooler air in. But if it's dry, cool air, it's gonna go in and lower your VPD number, raise your VPD by lowering your humidity. And so we've often played with this. There's low-tech ways. You can take your exhaust fan and you can set it on a timer so that we still get CO2 by running that timer maybe 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off, or 15 minutes on every hour. Then at least it's a routine that the plants get used to. And we're bringing in fresh air. Fresh air has the CO2. If you're in a sealed room, you have to add it. Okay, so now we're bringing in fresh air so they can breathe. And the temperature will be helped a little bit, but when we go to a timer, when we're about CO2, it's better to dim your light to match the temps, okay? I would rather see you at 500 PPFD than keeping it at 100 degrees and having to exhaust the air and drive the humidity down. The other alternative is to have a lung room, your bedroom, the garage, wherever your grow is, and raise the humidity there so that now this is your ideal range. Let's say now it's 75%. Now you can exhaust all you want. All you're doing is taking hot air out and bringing cool air in. If your bedroom's small, this air is gonna get hot. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll exhaust out the window and intake from inside. I guess what I'm getting at is there's just a constant relationship between all of these. Now that we're able to measure the intensity of the light, which might raise the temp, which might change the VPD, we can decide, you know what? I'm gonna keep my lights a little lower. That'll keep all this formula working together like a clock and all the gears intertwining to tell you what time it is. When we start to offset one of these, maybe we have no control. And let's say, even when it's dim, it's way too hot. I'd rather you deal with the temperature if it's really bad and just leave your humidity low. What I don't like to see is big swings. So some people will buy a humidifier, it'll run out of water, they'll get home, the humidity was 65, now it's 10, then up to 65. I'd almost rather you have no humidifier and just keep it low and let the plants get used to it. The other thing is in a tent, I typically don't have to keep adding humidity as I get deeper in flower because a full canopy of plants will create quite a bit of humidity as they're growing based on the transpiration, based on the light intensity. So I feel like I could just do episode after episode just on this subject because we get so many nuances, but I had to do it. I wanna make sure that we drive home the base fundamentals. Look at our feed chart on buildasoil.com under education, the complete system. You can download the PDF. We're gonna update it for 2024, but it will have your DLI, your VPD, and now you should know what those mean. Thanks for watching this. Let's go back to the 4x4 grow tent, and I'm gonna show you how I'm going to just start to dial in my environment. I may not do it all at once, but I've got 2 seedlings in there. I'd like to crank up my light a little bit, measure the PAR, get my VPD in line, and to do so, I either have to keep my light dimmed or I have to start adding humidity. Because if I crank my light, temps are gonna go up, even in winter. That's gonna cause it to be too hot and it's gonna be stale in there. So I want to exhaust to bring the CO2 in. That'll lower the humidity. So you're gonna see in real world in a few minutes exactly how I'm gonna do that, and then you can copy along with me. So let's go check that out right now. Okay, so we're back from the whiteboard. I hope that helped. I hope that wasn't too much. If you think it helps, you can share that with your friends. Otherwise, if I'm missing something, please comment and let's do the FAQ, and I'll do an FAQ video that I'll answer your questions in. And I think if somebody watches both the video I explained on the whiteboard and the FAQs together, they'll understand this entire season or this entire episode. We're also gonna do the same thing in the 10 by 10 tent, but I'm just gonna use the same principles that we taught today, and I'll show you when we dial that environment in. It is a little bit easier in the big tent. That's why I wanna show you more how you're gonna grow on a 4x4. So let's get into it. Let's open it up. Okay, so we're at 72% humidity and we're at 81 degrees. So to keep this whole thing going, we need to be able to stay within a certain VPD and a certain DLI. And those numbers, in case you don't wanna do all the searching, they're right on our chart. I'm gonna grab the chart. I'm gonna go over the numbers while we set this up. So give me 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, so you can download this chart. If you go to BuildASoil.com, go to education on the top, click on the complete system, you can download the schedule. And while the feeding, I talked about this in the whiteboard part a few minutes ago, the feeding isn't really necessary. We can do water only, so long as you keep the light in the right zone where it's not overdriving past your soil speed and the environment's good. And so on here, since we're in seedlings or rooting cuts, really we're moving into the vegetative phase since those seedlings are getting slightly bigger now. I'm still gonna go with the first one. So the photo period, 20 hours of lights on, okay? Right now, I'm plugged straight in, we're on 24 hours of light. These are auto flowers, so that really is okay, but I'd like to go to 20 hours. So I'm gonna grab a timer, we'll set that up. You can also use the NIWA, N-I-W-A. It's a power strip that gives you an app, and it'll turn your light on, off, it'll power your humidifier, it'll power all the things that you want right there. AC Infinity, they also make a basic controller. They also have an advanced pro controller that we carry that will fire everything just like that. But you don't need the controller. If you know how to operate, the controller makes it a lot better and a lot easier. So I just wanted to share that with you. When we're looking at 20 hours of lights on, I can use a timer or I can use the controller. Both will control the light to be on when I want it. And on here, the PPFD, the intensity is 2 to 300. And so I've got a par meter. What I want to show you, this is a Apogee, and it's a full spectrum. You don't have to get this meter. You can go to the light manufacturer and you can read up their par map, their PPFD map. They're going to tell you at how intense the light is at certain distances, and then you can just use that. You don't have to have your own, okay? If you're around here and you really want to, we lend this out sometimes, and so people can go to their home grow and kind of check it out. But this is going to measure the photons that are coming off the light. And so I turn it on, and here to follow from our whiteboard example, all right, if I put it right on there, I'm getting a reading of 3,000. Over that, 3,500. Well, that's the PPF, okay? So I could sell this light and say, PPF is 3,500, right? Way more powerful than you need. But we're looking for the PPFD at a certain distance over a certain square, like footprint. Now the PPFD is usually measured in a meter squared, and so I'm not gonna look for exact PPFD numbers. All I do is I get a reading of the PPF from the light down in certain areas, so I can see how much of those photons actually make it to the plant, depending on where the plant is. And so down here, we're at 225, 230, 235, 230. So right across at that right there, it's 230. Well, I wanna be, that's dim. Let's go a little bit brighter. I'm gonna go all the way on. And now we're at 375, 400. So we're a little bit higher. If you notice on my chart, which you can download so you can read, it says in the seedling or rooted cut, we wanna be at 2 to 300 par for 20 hours of light. If we do that, then the daily lighting integral will be 15 to 20, which is ideal. And so 2 to 300, you can tell if I crank this light all the way, we're already out of range. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in range where it's just a little bit less, dim it. Let me go there. 200. A little bit more. All right, so we're in that 275, 280. Let me go just a little bit more. 300. 300. So now I'm in the ideal lighting from that distance. Now I could save a little electricity, lower this light a lot closer to those two plants, remeasure it, and I'd be using less electricity to get the same lighting, right? The PPFD that we were talking about. But it's easier for me to leave it up. I can film, I can go in there, I can see, I can check it out. I've got glasses, a lot of times I'll wear them when I'm in here by myself. The lights are bright. Sometimes when I'm by myself, I'll just immediately dim the light when I go to work on it. When I leave, I'll raise it back up. I can always use this, but just so that I'm comfortable, I know that at this height and that distance, max power is about 400 all the way down to the bottom of that soil. So I could pretty much go max right now. But if I go just under that, it's already 79 degrees and now it's 42% humidity. So if we look at VPD, that's way off. What I want to do, if I target on this chart, I want to be in the 75 to 85% humidity and 75 to 85 temperature. And that gives me a 0.5 to a 1.0 vapor pressure deficit. 1.0 is totally fine. And that would be, in that more 85% range as far as, 85 degrees. So with LEDs, I'm good to go warmer. And the reason why, which I didn't cover in the whiteboard video, which I forgot to, and it's very important, we've talked about it in the past, is the temperature that I use to calculate this stuff is based on the leaf temperature. And if you get a little laser reader, which we've got here, and I get a leaf temperature rating, it's lower than the temperature in the tent. So I can base the temperature of my VPD based on the leaf, which is probably in that 73, 74 degree range, even though my temps are 78. Get a reading so you can set it up on your own. You can use the ambient air temperature, but just know with LEDs, your leaf surface temperature is probably a little lower. Back in the day when we all ran 1,000 waters, or a lot of people were running the double-endeds as those became popular, those would push heat down. And that heat would raise the leaf surface temperature higher than your ambient temp. Because of that, a lot of growers would keep their grow in the 70 to 75 degree range. Their leaf surface temperature would now be in that 75 to 85 degree range. That would cause nutrient cycling and it'd be good. For us, if we're at 80 degrees and our leaf is cooler, that may not be quite enough to grow them as fast as we want. So I like a little bit warmer temperatures when it comes to CMH, when it comes to LED. So with the LED, let's say I'm targeting that higher 85 degree temperature. Now I need to keep my humidity that high. And so for me, this is not a set it and forget it. Once I close my tent up, I'm gonna see if it starts to exhaust. The goal for me is to have it exhaust at least once an hour, least because that brings in fresh air. Now when the seedlings are really small, they don't need much CO2. It's like me being in a warehouse. There's plenty of oxygen for me to breathe. But if I put myself in a closet, it's possible I could breathe that oxygen out within a few hours. They breathe CO2. So when we have big plants and no airflow coming in, they're gonna run out of CO2 right away. So fresh air is how we keep CO2 flowing. Problem is it's not very humid in here. So as soon as I start bringing fresh air in, I'm gonna tank my humidity. So let me show you what I've got to deal with that, okay? I've got the AC Infinity humidifier, which you can see right here. It's a ultrasonic humidifier. It's got a few discs in the bottom that basically vibrate with sound the water until it makes a fog and blows out the top. And we used to carry the BuildASoil humidifier. AC Infinity just made it better. And so I decided to just carry this. You can use a humidifier from Walmart. Just put it in the corner over there. The ultrasonic ones, not the hot ones. They work really well. The challenge is those little ones with one disc, they may not keep up with your exhaust. If that's the case, you're gonna wanna dim your light so that the exhaust doesn't kick on very often. And if you are in a situation where you notice that when your lights dim, the heat never gets triggered, your exhaust may never trigger on, which means you're never bringing CO2 in, it may be better to run your exhaust on low all the time, the lowest setting, and bring in fresh air all the time, and then just try and keep up with the humidity no matter how high you can get it. So with this one, you can actually use a tube. AC Infinity provides this like reptile cage style tube that you can put on the outside of your tent and bring this inside. Problem is we're running a lot of moisture through this tube, so it'll start to condensate and drip. And that's fine if that's what you have to do, but I've got plenty of space inside my grow tent. That's why I like a 10 by 10. You can get a 5 by 5, but it's nice to have space inside your tent. And so what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna hook the humidifier up inside the tent. I've got these seedlings here, which the 5th one never popped. I dug around in there and it looks like it tried to and then just kind of petered out. So it happens, but we got more seeds than we're supposed to be even in the pack. And today Kevin's gonna take these 2 home. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this reservoir out of here since we're not gonna leave it in here. And then this reservoir will be outside the tent when we hook up the auto pots. And that'll be in another episode where we actually turn those on. But the auto pot doesn't need to be activated until the plants are bigger and the roots are to the bottom. So let's move that. Okay, and I'll keep my little temperature device. Put it on the floor here. Okay, so now I have space for my humidifier, which I'm gonna put in here. All right, now I just ran the electrical out the side, so I can just plug it in. You might have to bring a power strip to the outside of your tent. You can also zip tie a power strip on the pole. What I don't like to do is have electrical power strips on the ground where you might have water that leaks and goes over to the electrical. Although I've never really had an issue with it, I think it's important to address that. So mine's just plugged in outside the tent. You can see right away it started firing because I got it programmed to a certain humidity. And this is what reads the humidity. It comes with it. And this reads the temperature and humidity and will fire the humidifier on and off. So I'm gonna dangle this around where the plants are. If you get their big controller, you can just use one that plugs into the controller and both fires the temperature and humidity from the same one. I'm doing a little more low tech. I'm just using the one that came with it. And so since it's inside the tent, all I'll do is loop it over the grow light and I'll have it read the humidity from about where the plants are. I don't want it to be right in the stream of the humidity, right? So I'm just gonna drop it a little bit lower. And I'll move that around as the grow goes. I'm just setting it up super basic right now so I can show you what we're doing. And then what I'm gonna do is set the humidity sensor, set the humidity to be at my target. And so you saw at 85 degrees, I wanna be around 75% humidity or higher in that tent. So I'm gonna go do that. So I just set it to 75%, and then you can increase it so it blows a lot or a little. And depending on how much exhaust is coming out, you might need to really pump that thing. So let me crank it up a little bit. Okay, so now that is pumping the humidity out of there. And then what you don't see is I have a little fan right here, and this is just an AC Infinity clip fan. This will now spread that humidity around since it's just fogging straight there. And the other thing is that keeps airflow, so it keeps removing heat from my light. If you have an LED and no air movement, it can fry the chips over a long period of time. The air movement off the top is the only thing that removes heat from the product, from the LED light. So now you can see humidity's going. We've got the airflow. Last, what I need to do is, that will turn off if it gets too humid. But if the light is too warm in here and it starts to go above 85 degrees, it's just gonna cook. It can go up to 100 degrees and nothing would stop it. But I do have my fan. And if you remember from the whiteboard video, I told you I like to put mine outside the tent on the top because it gives me the maximum amount of room. I don't like to put my fan on the inside. That's more for odor control, and that's not something that's terribly important to me. And there are other ways to do that as well. So this fan is not on right now. I've got it hooked up to the variable speed control. Sometimes I use that and I just put it on low. But I'm gonna unplug that and I'm gonna plug it into the actual controller here. So now the fan and everything will turn on. And then what I need to do is the last part is another temperature reader, humidity reader. Because right now I'm running the humidifier separate. I don't have it plugged into a controller. I could probably plug it into that, but I'm just showing you how to separately do everything. If you know how to do that, then using the controllers is super easy. It's just less to do. And so this one will need to read that I want to turn on if it goes above 85 degrees. Now, there's lots of ways to set these little controllers. I'm not gonna go into that because you might have a different controller. Just know that I'm gonna set my fan to exhaust air if it gets to 85 degrees. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close my tent up and I'm gonna make sure it at least does get to 85 degrees, because if this light intensity keeps it at 80 degrees, then my fan's never gonna turn on. What I might do is lower the temperature to kick on at 78 degrees or 80 degrees. The reason why is what I want is my temperature for my light to rise until it hits the trigger, then the fan to go and exhaust air, and that to lower the temperature. When it starts playing with that trigger, that brings CO2 in all the time, every time it cycles. Otherwise, like on the NIWA app, I can just set my fan to cycle once every hour for maybe 10 minutes. And then the rest would be triggerable. So these controllers, they give you tons of configuration, but at least when you're a home grower, you need to know, what do I do? So if I don't have a controller, and I want fresh CO2, the next best way is to go get a timer. You can either run it on low speed so you can get a variable speed control, run air on the lowest setting all the time and hope that keeps your temps in check and hope it keeps your humidity high enough. Otherwise, what you can do is go get a timer, mechanical one, whatever, and you can do 15 minutes on maybe every hour, or 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off. That'll bring fresh CO2 in, that'll cycle the air, and then you're just gonna have to monitor temperatures another way. So let me plug this in. I'm not gonna make it all pretty, I'll do that later. I just wanted to show you how it works. So ideally what you do, it's got on the AC Infinity tent at least, you can just run this through the side, but the AC Infinity has like a hole right here. And so I can actually run it through the tent, which I don't have it all hooked up. Essentially what it's gonna happen is that's just gonna be in here and it's gonna be reading from the same spot. So I'll run that through the tent in a couple of minutes. I just need to get this powered up. So we are powered up. And now I'm gonna go to the setting for high temp, and it's off. I'm gonna set it to 84 degrees. Low temp, off. High humidity, I don't want it. My humidifier is gonna work. So I'm gonna hold the up and down arrow until it goes to 0. That's off now. Low humidity off. The only thing firing this now is the high temp. So that means that my fan, my AC Infinity fan, it's gonna kick on when it gets to 84 degrees and it'll ramp up slowly until it gets a really high speed if it needs to. And then I'll monitor that to see if that's enough. Now, let me just see if I can pull this through so I can zip it up. Go in here, I got it all light blocking, it's pretty cool. Pull that through. Okay, so now we're hooked up through the tent and I can actually close it up. You can see the fogger's running like crazy. It's gonna keep blasting until I close it because it can't hold the humidity, but already it's at 62%. The other thing that I didn't mention is that when you do run that much humidity, it kind of lowers your temps. And that's why you might have to play with the trigger on there to get it to come in. But had you not understood the principle of bringing fresh air in, the temperature, the VPD, the DLI, maybe you wouldn't know that you needed to trigger sometimes. You might set it at the high temp, just walk away, not knowing that it never fires, never brings in fresh air, never brings in the CO2, and that's why your plants are declining in health. And then you could message us and say, temps are here, I water good, I do everything right, what's wrong with my plants? It's gotta be the soil, or it's gotta be this nutrient that I used. And we'll find out that this wasn't programmed right, there's no fresh air, it's running out of CO2, that one overwatering happened, and then the light was on super bright and it couldn't get any nutrients and it started to decline. This all interplays together, and when you get this right, it makes a huge, huge difference in your grow. I want to open it back up. I'm going to grab the camera and show you what the seedlings look like because we're on day, I want to say they sprouted and we recorded the last video where I transplanted them on a Sunday, and today's Thursday, so they've only been above ground for like 4 or 5 days. So they're very, very small, but they're healthy right now. I'll show you what they look like, and then we'll just keep tracking it as we do each episode, tell you what day we're on from germination so you know exactly, following along on the Autoflower series with us, and then we'll start giving you readings on our temperature. So, oh, it's like fully foggy in there, that's awesome. And now you can see, look at it, it's 70 degrees. So, man, at 69 degrees, like it's going down in temp. So I'm probably gonna have to adjust my settings. What I may do is just lower that humidifier a little bit, but here's what's gonna happen. That humidity, it's gonna peak and it's gonna turn off. Then the humidifier won't be on until the temps rise, and that kicks that on and it cycles. So it'll start to happen, but that looks like a little much. That humidifier is pretty badass. So I will check on this in the next half hour or so, see if I see any cycling happening. That's part of why the app is fun. When you have like the knee-wall controller, you can really dial it all in. Otherwise, I think that's really everything. I'm gonna show you the seeds in 1 second. Okay, so we'll wrap it up. I'm thinking in the next few episodes we'll be, 84% humidity in there. Okay, that thing's not gotta be triggering. I think I just have it on high and turned off the humidity function, so let me just get that right real quick. Okay, that fixed it. I just had it pumping on high. All right, let's take a look. There we go. So there's the one in the BuildASoil light. It's looking beautiful. Okay, now this is an exact comparison. They're from seed, they're not clones, right? But here's the other one. This one is slightly smaller. I don't think it's a result of the soil at this point. It's gonna take that full cycle to determine if this Autoflower soil is any better. Right now the auto pots are not on. I've just top watered, some microbe complete. That's it. That's the setup. There's the fan, there's the light. Okay, Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching these series. It makes a huge difference in my lives, my family's lives, all the employees that work here. You know, there's 30 of us that are running around packaging stuff up and mixing things all here in Colorado to ship it out. And it's like our dream come true. So thank you so much for watching, the questions that you ask, all the reposts on Instagram. It really makes our day every time we get a message from you guys. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, like, tell your friends. Of course, drop some comments and some questions in there so we can make the FAQs. And until next time, I'll see you on the next BuildASoil episode.